Hello and welcome back to the Innovation Room podcast. Today's episode is focused on new business building inside established organizations and the culture that surrounds it. And probably there's no one better to open this conversation for us than Frank Mates. Frank is an expert in corporate business building, an innovation advisor to corporates, and author of 2 books on creating new businesses from corporate startups, Scaling Up Corporate Startups and Lean Scaleup, with actually a 3rd book on the topic now being in the making. He co-created the Lean Scale-Up framework, offering best practices for creating profitable businesses. He is a founder of Lean Scale-Up Consulting Agency, and he is truly passionate about helping corporate innovation practitioners improve their business building capabilities. I'm grateful to have him here today to have this conversation with me and share his insights, and I truly hope that you will be able to take some great lessons from this conversation too. Hello, Frank. I'm super happy to have you today join the Innovation Room podcast. Welcome.
Welcome, Diona. Thanks for having me here.
The pleasure all mine, but I guess let's start with the basics, and I would like to first get to know you a little better. So if you could tell about your professional background, how did you end up with Lean Scale Up? I think that would be a good start.
Yeah. I mean, that's really a challenge to make that long story short. But in essence, Diona, I've been working in the space that people these days call innovation for 20 plus years. It all started when the term didn't exist. There was new product development, right? And so some 10 years ago, I got interested in that out of the box space, right? Open innovation back then was the hot topic of the day, and I helped companies to find solutions to their technical problems. And then some 5 years ago, my clients, which are large European global champions, companies like BP, Bosch, Telefonica, etc., they asked me, Frank, our problem is really not in the early stages, right? Our problem is not in having ideas. We have more ideas that we could ever implement. The problem that we're seeing is the business impact that comes out from all of these innovation activities. Is there something that you can help us with? And so that made me curious, and I looked around and I found nothing. Right? Academia was saying, well, you have to split operations and innovation. Let's put it that way, the ambidexterity stuff, right? But academia didn't say, how do you bring things together at the end of the journey? The large consulting companies did not have a viewpoint on that back then. So I said to 20 plus companies and also some business schools, well, guys, we need to stick our heads together, the wisdom of the crowd, to understand why is it so hard for companies to build new businesses, completely new businesses, on the side of the existing business, and how could a solution look like? Well, that's where the whole journey started, and out came the framework that has been branded Lean Scale-Up. But to make it clear, Diona, that's not Frank, right? It's Frank moderating a process with brilliant minds from leading companies and leading business schools.
It's kind of like your book that you're working now on the 3rd revision, and
yes, yeah.
It was joy to see that there's so many people that can contribute and comment on the part that you have online. So I think that's a very great way to do the business, to join everyone and connect all the great minds to one project.
Exactly.
But talking about new businesses, there's so many different terms how to call it. When I was researching the topic, there's corporate venturing, there's entrepreneurship, that's corporate business building. So how do you see this landscape, and what kind of terminology do you use, and what you prefer, and what do you think works best for growing new businesses? That's kind of big topic, the big question.
Yeah, but it's a mandatory topic, and thanks for bringing up this so early to avoid any confusion. So these are the definitions that I use, right? I'm not claiming that these are the right ones and the only ones. Actually, as you said, there are tons of them out there. So for me, new business building is to bring new business models to scale. Well, if you look at business models, we all have seen that business model canvas, right? So some things are different, new customers, new channels, new value proposition, etc., name it, and then introduce it to the market and take it to scale, which obviously implies that there are many, many customers who adopt that kind of solution. Well, you also mentioned corporate venturing. I don't like to use that term because it's very close also from the language to corporate venture capital and joint venture and these types of notions. So I really like to speak more about corporate startups when you see the potential for a new business model and the company says, well, let's build a team and let's fund this team and let's set this team on a mission to build this new business, right? That's, in my terminology, a corporate startup. And I use the term corporate venture when there is an external a greenfield startup with some VC money backed by VC money, right? And the corporate says, well, I take a minority stake, some 5, 10, 25%, what they typically take. But I do have a provision, like for instance, BP, they have a scaling up factory called Launchpad, to take this external startup in and make it big fast because I've got client access and etc. and all the other things. So that's how I see it, corporate startup, corporate venture. What I think is also fundamental to look at things is when we speak about exploration and exploitation. So it's really fundamental to understand where the problem comes from, and maybe we touch upon this later on, to say, well, at the end of the day, there are two systems under one corporate roof, and you need both systems to future-proof the company, right? There's the now system, as I call it, or I call it the red shirt system, since the people working in here, 98, 99% of staff, right? They're running the day-to-day business, which is highly competitive, which is in the red ocean, meaning the company battles with the usual suspects for the same customers using comparable value propositions and channels, etc. Red oceans in here, right? And there's a second system, the innovators, right? They're looking for the blue oceans, I call them, the blue system or the blue shirts working in here. They are exploring, right, what could be in the future a significant, sizable business that obviously runs on the same process and structural attitude like today's business. So maybe that's for an initial terminology that helps us during this conversation.
And do you see some kind of clear line when a business should look for opportunities inside to start these entrepreneurial opportunities in businesses, or when to look for new ventures outside the company?
What I discover is you need to do both. And there are success stories for all of them. So, for instance, the prime example for a corporate startup is Amazon Web Services, which, as we speak right now, is an 80 billion business on a run rate, right? Obviously, that's a huge success. It started off when Amazon recognized, it was at the turn of the century, that their existing IT structure was not scalable, right? So they had to revamp and remodel everything, and they got the brilliant idea, why not have our customers pay for that IT transformation, right? And if we look at the case of BP that I mentioned earlier, well, one of the external greenfield startups that they took into that scaling up factory called BP Launchpad is Photech. Photech uses optical fibers to sense the environment, to hear and to listen, if you will, which could be applied, for instance, to monitor railway tracks or to monitor national borders if there are no people trespassing, etc. Photech these days is on a way to become a unicorn. So success stories everywhere, if you make it right. That's the point.
And what are the excuses that you hear why companies or people should not be going one way or another? What are the barriers that entrepreneurs face in established organizations?
See, as I already indicated earlier, it's a system problem, right? 98, 99% of the people are working in the day-to-day business, in today's business, right? And their goals and their bonuses are tied to executing flawlessly the past success recipe, if we want to call it that way, right? So they run the processes and they get their bonus when they squeeze out 0.1% more productivity in that manufacturing process, or if you win 0.5% more customers in sales and marketing. This is how they tick, right? They are completely focused with, and I don't mean this in any way disrespectful, on flawless execution what has already been built in the past, right? And the innovators now, they come with a different mission, right? They say, well, it's good what we have built in the past, but we want to create something new, right? And new always means there is no standard for that. There's no process for that, right? So this is what I see the brick wall that these innovators are running against. The new system versus the now system. I mean, you can find a couple of what I call areas of tension, right? It's about, say, the culture that people say, you don't belong to us, right? We're process people. And you innovators speak to us about experiments. Well, we do not do experiments. We run processes, right? We are predictable. We are productive. Or you see, for instance, when it comes to governance, many of the stakeholders that made their career in the red shirt world, right? They look at new business building as if it were a part of the established business, right? So they assemble large committees, right, that bridge the silos as they are used to in the red shirt system. But this is not how you can make a success in a new world, right? So if just one last example, if you talk about AI these days, right, there are a handful of people who fully understand what's going on, right? And you cannot have a governance committee that is not firm in the topic that is being discussed.
And you kind of touched upon that. Another question that I really wanted to ask is that innovators say that we want to run tests, and other part is saying that we don't do that. So once the new project gets approved and gets kind of into motion, how do you build that trust internally between completely different departments? Because that's what I noticed from, let's say, my own environment, that people who have this very hands-on approach, like, and do technical work, they do not see innovation. They see innovation only as creating new physical products, real new solutions. So how do you build that internal trust into these new projects?
When I started to co-create the Lean Scaleup, one of the, I think, brilliant insights that these companies brought to the table is to say, well, if we look at how we progress in innovation, we are looking at 3 dimensions, right? Number one are their customers who are willing to pay the desirability. The second is, can we make it? Can we industrialize it, the feasibility part of it? And the third one is, can we make a business with profits and margins out of the viability? But this is what these companies found out when we started discussion. The whole corporate context in which this all unfolds is not represented. So, I mean, it's funny, you talk about corporate startups and corporate business building and corporate whatever, as we alluded to initially, but you do not see those checkpoints in here that relate to that corporate context. So what we did is, and what we embedded in the Lean Scaleup is a 4th dimension that we called contextuality, so that it relates nicely from a language point with the desirability, feasibility, and viability, right? And establishing that corporate context runs along the whole innovation journey. So it starts, for instance, with aligning on what are the search fields, what are meaningful search fields for us as a company, right? And then you typically get thousands of ideas what you could do in that space. But what is a meaningful idea? For instance, relating to the capabilities that the company has, and or the new capability, just throwing in AI as an idea, that the company needs to build, right? And the corporate startup is then charged with building those capabilities, right? Then it goes on, how do you actually validate in a corporate context And what you typically find is that all the validation frameworks have a product-centric perspective, right? They talk about the minimum viable product, and they talk about product market fit, etc. They don't speak about building a business. If a company wants to create a new business, it is interested in the business. It's only secondarily interested in the products that they carry. Once you have done your validation, right, you prepare it for scaling up, right? And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the red shirts, the day-to-day business, need to provide the resources, the funding, etc., like access to customers and preparing for reintegration further down the road. And then you do the scaling up, but this is a mixed approach between the corporate scale-up, startup in the scaling up phase, plus the corporate. So you see, it's a whole way of thinking, right? There's a new level that the typical corporate frameworks do not represent. And that's what you need to organize. And luckily, there is this framework out there, to my knowledge. It's the only one, it certainly is the first one, that has this contextuality layer built in.
And how about the cultural side in general? Because you worked with a lot of businesses that have been established decades ago. And maybe I'm completely wrong, but I imagine that these structures, these companies might be a little bit rigid and resisting the change. So maybe you have some kind of practical advice or best tips and tricks for the listeners how to, in a way, fight the old school culture within the organization that says, like, no, we don't need anything new because what we used to do back in the day works today as well. So how to kind of approach the cultural issues.
So first of all, I mean, if the people are just listening and they didn't see the quote unquote, the fight, right? So Daniela, it's not about fighting. There are two systems. Each of those systems is a right on its own, right? And the challenge is to make 1 + 1 = 3, right? Running the day-to-day business, producing the margins that you need to keep the stakeholders and the shareholders happy, right? And at the same time, fund the search for tomorrow's business, right? So it's a win-win-win because the customers should win as well as too. My view is, Daniela, that culture is is a kind of artifact of what is going on around that. So what is basically how the company sees its mission, how the company defined the degrees of freedom that the individual have, how the company defined what is being rewarded and what is being penalized, etc., that kind of thing. But you're perfectly right. The Lean Scaleup says in order to solve that system problem between today's business and tomorrow's business, you need to have a system solution. And this system solution has 3 parts. Number 1, it's leadership, balancing the now and the new. Number 2, it's looking at the process in the right way. And number 3, and here we are, it's about culture, people, and collaboration, right? It needs to be embedded, made congruent, if you will, in the overall setting. You cannot simply say what we had until yesterday is good, is bad, right? Now comes the new stuff, right? Because you need to ride that horse, the decades-old horse, right, for as long as possible to generate those margins.
From similar perspective, how do you tell good from bad in the new business kickoffs, let's say? Because quite often happens that businesses are starting something new and starting new projects within just for the sake of doing, for the sake of good rep, and it's so-called innovation theater happening within the organization. And I think that's something what can damage the trust super badly as well. So how do you also, like, maybe some kind of practical ways that how you are able to say, like, this is value generating and this is not really legit project? How do you look at that?
It's the art of validating in a corporate context, and it's the art of killing. So, I mean, the typical red shirt senior manager would say, well, we launch a project which is about building a new business, and then they install that large governance board and the funding, and they nominate one person, put the pat on the shoulder and say, you are building our future, good luck, etc., that kind of stuff. That's not how you run it. I mean, you have to run experiments after experiments, and you have to build these experiments into a solid validation frame, right? A solid validation frame where you validate the customer side, the product tech IP side, the corporate context side, and the capability side at the same time, right? You need to define the thinking tools that tell you this is done, this is validated. We do not have to keep on going searching the truth in here. But you also need to be clear to say, well, there are some key results that we expected from the customer side, and we did not manage to get those results. So we have to kill this one startup. But good news is we've got 7 other ideas that we are testing and validating. So it's about the mindset, the entrepreneurial mindset. It's about taking, as Jeff Bezos would tell us, small, rapid, effective experiments, and then let the data speak.
So if you were able to pick just one main message that you would like our listeners to take from this conversation and what you said, what it would be?
Mm-hmm. So companies need to build new businesses, right? The world outside is VUCA, as they say. It's volatile, it's unshaped, it's complex, it's dynamic, it's ambiguous, etc. The problem is, if you look at the stats, only 3% of the attempts to build new businesses will win. 29 out of 30 will fail. The reason for that is that we do have the system problem. There's a today's business and there's a tomorrow's business, right? And how do you solve that? How do you bridge these systems? How do you connect these systems so that you future-proof the company today and tomorrow? And it turns out that you need to work on 3 levels: the leadership level, the process level, and the culture and the collaboration level. And the framework is called the Lean Scaleup, because it takes up the good things from the lean startup, but it makes it broader, extends it to the corporate context, and it makes it longer. It looks at the end-to-end journey. Leanscaleup.com is the website. Please stop by.
And talking about Lean Scaleup, when can we expect the 3rd revised book to be published?
We're currently co-creating with more than 100 practitioners and half a dozen of business schools. So if some of the readers are interested in joining the process, please ping me, leanscaleup.com, and then go to book, and there's a pop-up, etc. I think it will be, the writing will be finished over the summer break, summer holidays, right? So somewhere in September, October, you will find it on Amazon and all the other retail channels.
Okay, so I will be sure to link those in the transcript and description of this video. Frank, thank you so much for this quite quick one, but really, I think, interesting and inspiring conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.